Welcome to Deep Dive. In this episode, we dive deeper into out-of-body experiences. This is part 2 of our OBE deep dives. And for this deep dive, we have 4 reference books, which you will see on screen.
Okay, let's unpack this. Did you know that some surveys, they suggest a pretty surprising number of people, maybe like 1 in 5 even, say they've had this weird experience, feeling like they're floating outside their own body.
Yeah, it's kind of startling when you first hear those numbers.
It really is. Almost unbelievable until you start digging into it. I even read this account from a psychologist, Susan Blackmore, actually, when she was a kid struggling in a pool.
Oh, I know that story.
She had this profound sense of just watching herself from above, completely detached. It really makes you wonder, like, what is going on there?
It certainly does. And the sheer number of people reporting this, I mean, despite the skepticism lots of people feel initially, it's quite something. It's not just some, fringe thing. It's documented across cultures, history.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're diving, headfirst into this really intriguing world of out-of-body experiences, OBEs.
Or OBEs, you sometimes see it written that way.
Yeah, right, OBEs. And some people connect it to astral projection. Now, if you're anything like I used to be, your eyebrows might be, heading north right about now.
Understandable skepticism.
Totally. But look, we're not going to get lost in like spooky stories or just wild speculation here.
No, the aim is different.
Our goal is to really understand OBEs by looking at what scientists, researchers, experienced folks, what they've actually learned. Think of this as your shortcut, basically, to getting a solid, informed grasp on this.
Okay, so right off the bat then, what is an OBE? I think it's important we start with a definition that doesn't immediately assume things like souls leaving bodies or anything like that.
Good point. Keep it grounded.
Yeah. Researchers like Charles Hart and Hart, they described it more as an experience where someone perceives the world from a location outside their physical body.
Perceives. I like that word choice.
Exactly. It focuses on the feeling, the viewpoint, right, without making claims about what's physically happening, at least not yet.
That makes a lot of sense. Keep it focused on the experience itself. Okay, so it sounds like there isn't just one kind of OBE, is there? Like one flavor.
Definitely not. There's quite a variety reported.
Some people describe these really solid, almost tangible experiences. Like they're still in their room, maybe near the ceiling, but it feels dense.
Sometimes called etheric projections or real time zone experiences. It feels very close to the physical world.
Then you have others that sound much more airy, light, expansive maybe, seemingly far removed from the physical, what some call astral projections.
Right. And that variation itself is fascinating, isn't it? It suggests consciousness isn't just, one fixed mode of perception.
Does maybe tell us something about how consciousness shifts?
That's a key point, I think. The very subjectivity, the range of these experiences hints that maybe consciousness is more flexible than we usually assume.
And then there are these focus level experiences where people are still sort of aware of their physical body.
Yeah, some of the sources we looked at kind of differentiate those from a full OBE, where that physical awareness seems to drop away almost completely.
Right. And I even read about cases where someone's awareness just suddenly shifts, like to a totally new location, no travel time, no sense of moving there.
Instantaneous shifts.
Yeah. One moment meditating, the next year somewhere else entirely. But okay, for our purposes here, we're mostly focusing on those where the core feeling is being outside the body, right?
Exactly. That sensation of external perspective is the key marker for what we're digging into today. It's interesting how we try to categorize them, though, isn't it? It's that human need to bring order to something unusual.
Definitely. Now, something that kept popping up in the reading was fear. Like, it's a really big deal.
A major obstacle, yeah. Some authors explicitly call it the biggest hurdle.
One author, Peterson, he shared his own early experiences with those intense vibrations, the ones that often come before an OBE.
Oh, the vibrational state, very common precursor.
And he said the fear, the sheer intensity of it, almost stopped him from going further. It makes you wonder what's happening psychologically or neurologically at that moment.
Well, that brings up a really interesting idea. If we think about our everyday experience as a kind of a virtual world constructed by the brain.
Okay.
And maybe involving that area called the temporoparietal junction, the TPJ.
TPJ, right.
Then fear could act like a really powerful anchor, holding our perception firmly within that familiar framework of the physical body, preventing that shift.
Okay, the TPJ. This is where it gets super interesting scientifically. So the idea is that our experience in the body, out of the body, wherever, it's this ongoing story of experience created by the brain.
That's one way to conceptualize it, yeah.
The TPJ is key. Like when we're awake, it's processing all the sensory data coming in.
Right, integrating vision, touch, balance, creating our sense of being located in our body.
But when we're asleep and that sensory data flow slows way down, it can generate dreams, these elaborate scenarios.
Exactly. It doesn't just shut off, it starts creating internal realities. So the insight here might be that feeling in or out of the body is less about actual physical location.
And more about
the brain's current narrative, the story it's telling itself about where we are located. An OBE could be a significant shift in that narrative.
Wow. Okay. So when people actually try to induce an OBE, it seems there are sort of two main paths, direct and indirect.
Broadly speaking, yes. Direct is conscious effort, willpower, focus.
Like really trying to push yourself out?
Kind of, yeah. But the indirect strategy, which works more with the subconscious, that seems to be, well, maybe easier and definitely more common, especially since many OBEs happen spontaneously anyway.
That makes sense. Tapping into something that's already happening sometimes.
Right. Working with the brain's natural tendencies during states like sleep or near sleep, rather than trying to consciously force it against the grain.
And speaking of sleep, lucid dreaming comes up as this potential fast track.
Yeah, it's often mentioned as a gateway.
The idea is once you realize you're dreaming, you get lucid. You can then intentionally try to wake up, but within that dream state.
And supposedly that transition can lead directly into an OBE state.
It's like becoming aware you're writing the story, like you said, and then deciding to change the setting from the dream world to the OBE world.
That's a good analogy. Shifting the focus of that conscious awareness from the dream narrative to this different perceptual experience, the one where being outside the body is primary.
Okay, cool. So we've got a feel for the landscape. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty. The techniques, the strategies people actually use. Meditation seems relevant here.
Definitely. Direct OBE induction itself could almost be seen as a very specific kind of meditation, right? Highly focused intention.
But even just normal meditation, like mindfulness, might play a role. I remember reading about Ziwe.
Yes, Jürgen Ziwe. He reported numerous OBEs, but said they were often byproducts of his regular long-term meditation practice. It wasn't necessarily his main goal.
So just quieting the mind might open the door somehow.
That seems to be the idea. Reducing the external noise, sensory, and mental chatter might allow these less conventional internal perceptions to emerge. The brain might be more receptive to constructing alternative stories.
And another key seems to be that state between sleep and waking up. The hypnopompic state.
Right, waking up. And its counterpart, hypnagogic, is when you're falling asleep. Both are seen as useful, but hypnopompic often gets highlighted.
Why is that? Any advantages?
Well, the body's already deeply relaxed after sleep, right? And the brain is naturally starting to disconnect from the immediate physical senses after REM. Plus, maybe it's easier to hold on to conscious awareness as you emerge from sleep rather than trying to maintain it as you drift off.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. And some suggest OBEs triggered then might last longer.
That's sometimes reported, yeah. It's a state where those boundaries between conscious and subconscious are naturally more fluid, more blended. Fertile ground for unusual experiences.
Got it. Then there are these imagination techniques. Robert Bruce's rope technique is famous, but apparently often misunderstood.
Yeah, people often think it's just about visualizing a rope.
But it's not.
The emphasis, according to Bruce, is much more on tactile imagination. Actually feeling the rope, feeling your hands grip, feeling the muscles pull, using the sense of touch.
Because our hands have so many nerve endings. That imagined feeling is really powerful for the brain.
Exactly. It grabs the brain's attention in a very potent way. It highlights how focused sensory imagination, even imagined senses, can potentially shift the brain's processing and create a different sensory reality.
Interesting. And physical prep seems important too, like trying to reduce sensory input.
Yes, the goal is often to minimize external stimuli, to maybe encourage that TPJ, that brain region, to explore a different story.
So things like practicing in total darkness.
Yeah.
Or using sleep masks.
Right. Some even use halved ping pong balls over the eyes to create a uniform, unchanging visual field Ganzfeld effect. Anything to reduce visual noise.
And keeping your eyes physically closed during the actual attempt, that seems crucial.
That's a very consistent recommendation, yes. If the TPJ is trying to integrate sensory info, reducing that flow might make it more susceptible to internal experiences, like feeling you're outside the body.
Okay, now this next one seems absolutely critical everywhere I looked. Intention and desire.
Huge.
Yes. Apparently not enough to just casually try a technique now and then.
No, the sources really emphasize needing to think about it frequently throughout the day, constantly reinforcing to your subconscious that this is a priority, something you genuinely want to experience.
One of the early writers, Muldoon, he thought intense desire could actually activate the subconscious will to project.
That was his idea, yeah. That passion fuels the process, and mental rehearsal too.
Like vividly walking through the whole experience in your mind, start to finish.
Exactly. Immersing yourself in that imagined scenario. It's like sending a really clear blueprint to the subconscious, setting the destination, like you said earlier.
Right. The subconscious gets the message. This is where we want to go.
It becomes more attuned to pathways that might lead there.
There's even this almost paradoxical technique, trying to fool the subconscious.
By making your conscious awareness seem insignificant, like you fainted or something.
Yeah, like you're out cold. The idea is if the subconscious thinks the conscious mind is offline, it might just initiate an OBE on its own as part of its normal routine, perhaps.
It's a fascinating concept, mental subterfuge, almost.
But the trick is not to consciously grab the reins too soon, or it pulls you back.
Right, you might startle the process. It's about creating that window of opportunity for the subconscious to act without conscious interference.
Okay, and then there's a whole bunch of what are called indirect techniques.
Right, these often focus on subtle sensations during that drift into sleep.
Things like imagining you're rotating inside your body, or just watching those random images that flash behind your eyelids.
Hypnagogic imagery. Or vividly visualizing your hands, pretending you're swimming through the air.
Phantom wiggling. Like trying to move a finger you don't actually move.
Yeah. The common thread is focusing attention inward on subtle, internal, often pre-sleep sensations. Amplifying them, perhaps, allowing the brain to interpret them differently.
Leading potentially to that OBE feeling.
That seems to be the goal.
And for people who struggle with pure visualization, there are hybrid techniques, combining senses.
Yes. Like the heartbeat technique. It might involve visualizing something, imagining sounds, and focusing on a tactile sensation altogether.
Engaging multiple parts of the brain, maybe? Making the internal story more immersive?
That could be the logic, yeah. Creating a more convincing internal reality.
And finally, visualization-wise, there's Richard Craze's spinning disc technique.
Right. Imagine a colored disc spinning faster and faster.
Until it becomes pure white, grows huge, and then sort of pulls you out. There's a vortex.
That's the description. And it's interesting, that focus on white, it reminds you of that research by Newberg and Waldman.
On mystical experiences. And how the brain interprets whiteness.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if there's some shared neurological pathway being tapped into there. The brain's interpretation of intense light or whiteness in altered states.
Intriguing parallel. Okay, so loads of techniques. But what about the myths? Things people believe that maybe aren't quite right.
Ah, yes, the folklore around OBEs.
Robert Monroe, famous OBE pioneer, he recommended facing north.
He did. And there's that persistent idea about moon cycles affecting success rates.
But our sources, well, Peterson at least, seemed pretty skeptical about those, called them folklore. Said his own experiences didn't line up with direction or moon phase.
Right. And that's crucial, isn't it? Distinguishing personal anecdote or ritual from something scientifically verified. Someone might feel facing north helps them, but that doesn't make it a universal law.
Same for things like fasting or avoiding electronics before bed.
Exactly. People recommend them, sometimes strongly, but robust scientific backing. It's generally lacking.
These things might help someone get in the right mindset, maybe, like a placebo effect.
Could be. Rituals can provide focus, manage expectations, but are they direct causal factors? Probably not for most people.
Okay, and then the silver cord.
Ah, the iconic silver cord.
Comes up all the time in OBE reports and deep in occult literature too.
Yeah.
This shimmery elastic cord linking the traveler to the physical body.
Descriptions are remarkably consistent.
Yeah.
Silvery, gray, elastic, connects usually around the head or back.
But does it actually exist? Or is it something else?
Well, that's the big question. Explanations vary. Maybe it's a manifestation of the fear of getting lost. a sort of mental safety tether.
Or a self-fulfilling prophecy. You read about it, you expect it, so you perceive it.
That's plausible. Or even a form of synesthesia senses getting blended. Maybe the feeling of connection gets visualized as a chord.
Fascinating possibilities. Whether it's literal or symbolic, it's clearly a powerful image for many experiencers.
Undeniably, psychological factors, cultural narratives, they likely play a huge role in its prevalence.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and really dig into the science and maybe some of the skeptical takes too. One of the earliest clues came from Wilder Penfield, the neurosurgeon.
Yeah, way back in the 1930s, working with epilepsy patients.
He accidentally stimulated a specific spot in a woman's brain, right temporal lobe, probably that right TPJ we mentioned.
The RTPJ, yeah.
And she reported feeling like she was floating outside her body, just from brain stimulation.
That was a landmark moment, a direct indication of a link between neural activity in that specific brain region and the subjective experience of being outside the body.
Then we have Susan Blackmore, who actually had a really intense OBE herself early on.
Right, but then she became a prominent skeptic, advocating for purely brain-based explanations.
Her journey is interesting from experiencer to skeptic. It highlights the complexity, maybe.
Absolutely. It underscores the need for critical thinking, scientific rigor, even when dealing with profound personal experiences.
She often contrasts OBEs with things like auras. Like, people perceive auras, but there's no objective evidence for them. OBEs feel incredibly real, but that feeling doesn't automatically mean something non-physical is happening.
That distinction is vital. Subjective vividness doesn't equal objective reality separate from brain activity.
And more recently, Olaf Blank's research, using brain stimulation, like Penfield, but also modern brain imaging.
Yes, Blank's work has really solidified that TPJ connection. He's shown that stimulating that area can reliably induce bodily illusions, including that out-of-body feeling.
He also differentiates OBEs from autoscopy, right? Seeing a mirror image of yourself.
Yeah, he notes that in typical OBEs, the viewpoint isn't usually a mirror image. It's often from above or behind, but not a reflection.
Blank's work sounds like pretty strong evidence for a neurological basis. Manipulating the TPJ directly affects that sense of self and location.
It provides compelling support for the idea that OBEs are rooted in brain function, specifically in how the brain constructs our sense of bodily self in space.
And those virtual reality experiments are mind-bending.
They really are.
Researchers can actually create the illusion of being outside your body just by manipulating what you see and feel in VR.
Yeah, by carefully controlling visual perspective and tactile feedback, they can trick the brain into perceiving the self as being located somewhere else.
It really makes you question how much our normal sense of being inside our bodies is also just a construction based on consistent sensory input.
Exactly. These experiments powerfully demonstrate how the brain can be led to adopt a different model of self-location based purely on the sensory signals it receives and processes.
And interestingly, going back to surveys, OBEs aren't actually that rare, are they?
No, the percentages vary, but a significant chunk of the general population seems to have had an experience like this at some point.
Makes you wonder why it's not discussed more openly, maybe.
Perhaps stigma, or just the difficulty of explaining something so subjective. But the prevalence suggests the underlying brain mechanisms might be more common or more easily triggered than we think.
Okay, so if these brain states are key, what about altered states that might facilitate them? Sleep paralysis comes up a lot.
Yes. That state of being awake but unable to move, often happening when transitioning into or out of REM sleep.
Pretty terrifying on its own, I imagine.
It can be, yes. And surveys show it can be a precursor to OBEs for some. That unusual mixed conscious mind, paralyzed body might create a neurophysiological state conducive to OBEs.
And Robert Monroe again, with his binaural beats and hemisync.
Right, using sound frequencies to try and synchronize brain hemispheres, induce altered states favorable for OBEs, kind of like tuning the brain.
Has that been scientifically validated?
The precise mechanisms are still debated, but the anecdotal evidence is substantial. Many people find sound-based technologies helpful for exploring altered states.
Okay. And inevitably, substances. What's the connection there?
Well, it's complex. Cannabis, for some, seems to induce those vibrational sensations we talked about.
Which can sometimes precede an OBE.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's definitely not a guaranteed OBE pill. Very inconsistent.
What about ketamine?
Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic. Its effects can feel very much like an OBE because it fundamentally alters the sense of connection between mind and body.
And ayahuasca.
Ayahuasca gets mentioned too. Some users report OBEs, but often the descriptions sound more like ego dissolution, a sense of merging, rather than the classic detached observer viewpoint.
So substances can trigger similar feelings, but maybe through different mechanisms and with risks.
Exactly. It's crucial to consider the neurochemistry and potential dangers.
Then there were a couple of, well, more unusual things mentioned. Vitamin D.
Yeah, one source noted a personal anecdotal negative correlation. Taking vitamin D supplements seemed to decrease OBE frequency for them. Very speculative, obviously.
With raw potato starch.
Yes. The theory there involves gut bacteria and REM sleep. The idea is that resistant starch might alter gut flora in a way that shortens NREM sleep, potentially leading to longer REM periods, which are often associated with spontaneous OBEs and lucid dreams.
Definitely outside the box.
Extremely. And then there was caffeine with melatonin.
Yeah, trying to induce conscious sleep, but with warnings about drowsiness, obviously.
These unconventional ideas highlight how interconnected everything is: diet, sleep, physiology, consciousness. But they need much more rigorous study before we draw firm conclusions. Approach with healthy skepticism.
Absolutely. Okay, let's step back now. Think bigger picture. OBEs and broader consciousness. There's this idea that maybe the big transcendent experiences,
Yeah.
the ones that founded religions, Moses, Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad.
That maybe those were OBEs, interpreted through their cultural lenses.
Yeah, it's an intriguing thought that science might eventually offer a more universal way to understand, maybe even access, these profound states.
If you see OBEs as fundamental shifts in awareness, it's not a huge leap to imagine how such powerful experiences could be interpreted as divine encounters or access to higher realities within different belief systems.
And the overlap with near-death experiences, NDEs, is undeniable.
Very clear parallels. The tunnel, the light.
Right, common elements. Theories range from re-experiencing birth to neurological explanations, like a hyperexcited visual system during oxygen deprivation or brain stress.
It makes you wonder if there are core patterns in how the brain responds to extreme states, generating these archetypal experiences.
And people who have OBEs or NDEs often stress how incredibly real it felt.
That profound sense of reality, yes. Even when illogical things happen, like floating through walls.
A feeling of reality is so compelling.
It really underscores the power of these states, how convincingly the brain can construct alternative perceptual worlds that feel utterly authentic.
But when NDEs get presented as absolute proof of heaven, our sources urged caution.
Definitely a more critical perspective there, questioning claims of consciousness without any brain activities, scrutinizing the veridical perception cases where people supposedly saw things they shouldn't have been able to.
Like the Pam Reynolds case. Often cited, but there are questions about the timing of her awareness versus the medical procedures.
Exactly. Rigorous critique is essential for such extraordinary claims. While NDEs are deeply meaningful personally, attributing them solely to proof of an afterlife requires careful consideration of all potential neurological and psychological factors.
One source even hinted that the ego, our sense of I, might actually get in the way of maybe more objective astral experiences.
Implying that quieting the ego, achieving some self-transcendence, might allow for a less filtered, perhaps more profound OBE. Interesting idea.
Okay, shifting now towards more explicitly spiritual viewpoints. Astral projection in these contexts is often seen as a way to explore consciousness itself, right?
Yes, exploring consciousness, other dimensions, the inner self. And sometimes the idea is that dreams happen in the same place as OBEs.
But in dreams, we just lack conscious awareness of being out of body.
That's the concept. OBEs and dreams on a spectrum, with OBDs involving more conscious awareness and intention within those non-physical realms.
And these traditions often emphasize skills like relaxation, concentration, visualization as fundamental for astral projection.
Yes, mental discipline is key. And they also entertain the possibility of encountering other people out there in the astral plane.
A social dimension to OBEs.
Potentially, yes. Interaction with other conscious beings in that state.
The silver cord comes back here too, doesn't it? As that energetic link.
Yes, connecting the astral body to the physical during sleep or projection. And experiences there are often seen as symbolic, like dreams.
Needing intuitive interpretation, not literal.
Right. And distinguishing between temporary thoughts, emotions, the ego, perhaps, and a deeper, permanent consciousness.
And protection comes up too. Concerns about negative entities.
Yeah. Methods like recitations, protective circles are sometimes mentioned, but often the ultimate protection is seen as cultivating higher consciousness, love, inner strength. Your own state is paramount.
Interesting. Some views also suggest that just focusing on spiritual growth can lead to spontaneous OBEs.
Yes, that spiritual development itself can open these doors, and strong, clear intention is seen as vital for conscious projection.
They even talk about different dimensions, like the astral is the fifth, the mental as the sixth, each with unique characteristics.
It's a multi-layered view of reality, with OBEs potentially providing access to these more subtle levels of existence or consciousness.
And finally, there are these accounts, like from William Buhlman's work, of OBEs leading to really profound personal changes.
Absolutely. Emotional healing, spiritual insights, even perceived encounters with deceased loved ones. Transformation is a common theme.
And maybe more surprisingly, reported similarities between OBE phenomena and alleged ET contact or abduction experiences.
That connection is drawn by some researchers like Buhlman, yeah. Intriguing overlap in reported sensations and experiences.
And even the idea of using conscious OBE intention to help the dying transition.
A fascinating application suggesting consciousness can interact non-locally.
And this idea that maybe traditional heavens are more like astral reflections, and there are higher formless realms beyond even that.
These are really profound claims, moving far beyond simple out-of-body perception into the nature of reality, consciousness, and existence itself. Definitely food for thought.
Okay, wow. So we have really, truly taken a deep dive here into OBEs from, well, pretty much every angle: scientific, psychological, spiritual.
It's clear it's incredibly complex, multifaceted, still fascinates, still baffles in some ways.
Yeah. What really stands out, I think, is how different perspectives, even ones that seem contradictory, often circle back to similar themes.
Like the role of altered states, the power of intention, even if they interpret why those things matter very differently.
So whether you came here just curious, or maybe you're actively exploring this yourself, you've now got a pretty solid toolkit of information, of different ways to think about this.
And it seems that whether you lean towards the scientific view, fascinating brain phenomena, or a more spiritual one, journeys of consciousness.
Either way, OBEs seem to offer really valuable insights into reality, the self, the potential of human experience.
Ultimately, what's so compelling is how they challenge our basic assumptions, right? About self, body, the limits of consciousness, things we usually just take for granted.
Definitely. So maybe something to ponder as you go about your day. If that feeling of being outside your own body can be so vivid, so utterly real, even when it seems to break all the rules of the physical world, what does that ultimately suggest about the fundamental nature of consciousness itself? And about the vast, maybe largely unexplored potential we all have that might reach far beyond the physical? Thanks so much for taking this deep dive with us.